Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk ASPM. My name is Mark Lambert.
My name is Rohan Parak.
And we're here to talk today about codes to cloud. And this is part two of our mini-series. We've already talked about kind of code analysis and threat modeling. Now we're getting that code and we're deploying it into the cloud environment. And we're going to talk about the scanners that are involved in that. So Rohan, where does it start? You've written the code, now you've got to get the code into the cloud environment. What are the steps that you go through? What are the tools that you're going to start leveraging?
All right. So the code has to be packaged, right? And because now this has to be deployed on cloud, and on any cloud for that matter, it has to be packaged in a way where it can be universally deployed. So typically it starts with a container image, and that container image gets into an orchestration platform on cloud, which will be happening through IAC as a code, infrastructure as a code. The end goal is to be able to go on, take the piece of code that was developed, stored in code repositories, package it into a way where it can be deployed anywhere, and also have deployment methodology, deployment approach, deployment scripts put into an IAC code. And essentially that becomes your deliverable. That becomes part of your CD process where you have an image and have IAC code and few other configurations associated and ship it and run it on any possible cloud.
So where are the points of risk from a security perspective, and what technologies are we going to start using to validate that? So does it start with the creation of the image for the container, or does it start with the IAC, and kind of like what's the first step to take, and what are the tools that you're going to embed into your pipeline?
Right. So one would imagine that you have already taken care of your code, so why do you have to kind of do anything at, say, a container level? But the fact is your containers are based on another base image which you have taken from a marketplace, from another vendor, from open source images. So there's another addition of a open source component being added to your supply chain, which could be your base images. So you need to kind of do an additional scanning at the container level as well to make sure that anything did not creep up from the source code, but at the same time any other third-party components that we might be using, which could be a base image or anything else, the risk from that pops up as well. At the same time, the IAC infrastructure as a code part of it has to be evaluated against constant threats as well. Any kind of misconfigurations, secrets being embedded to them, and any potential issues that might come up once that those configurations, those IAM roles are deployed on the cloud. So at this level as well, you have to go and make sure that you are constantly assessing the risk that the container images and these IAC templates might pose.
Okay, so we've got our container built on, now we've got another level of software composition analysis, which we also talked about in the last podcast as well, more at the code level itself, but now we're kind of building that on, as you said, on top of the base image. We're now packaging that up with, in essence, a deployment script, and that deployment script could do things wrong, it could do misconfigurations, and then we're deploying it into the cloud, where we're additionally also going to start scanning that with cloud security posture management technologies. So, give me an example of how you have to start to try and tie all of this data together, because I know one of the things that we've been working on is how we can correlate across multiple scan types to kind of identify that root cause or the point of remediation.
Right. So you've run a container scan, right, and you found issues with the base image. Yes, you can fix that in the time when you're building image, but you found an issue in a library that was introduced in the development code itself. Now, when you created the code, when you developed the code, that library was fine, but then there was a new CVE discovered. So at this point, you need to be able to go back and say that the particular image that you're using, it has a vulnerable package which is being added to it. And you need to fix that, and build point, you can't fix that, you have to go back to the code. So you need to be able to go on and take the container image and trace it back to its source, its roots, its origins, which would be a repository, a GitHub repository, a GitLab repository, or whatever SCM that you might be using. So that part of the tracing it back is super important. The other area is CSPM, right? Cloud security posture would identify weaknesses, flaws in your cloud configurations. Often these are a result of an infrastructure as a template that has been created without keeping in mind the best practices about how secure the posture of the cloud should be. So you want to be able to go back and trace it back to saying that an IAM role which has some weakness issues can be traced back to the IAC code that was generated again in the CI side of things. So that correlation is something that we are kind of supporting it. And with that kind of visibility, your remediation time is reduced drastically. because then you know where exactly and who exactly to kind of work with to kind of start fixing it.
Yeah, so being able to really go right to left, correlating where the point of remediation is, where the root cause is. So CSPM, I'm going to find my misconfigurations, which are probably inside my infrastructure as code file, which obviously is in the code repository, so I'm scanning that as part of a code analysis scan. And then when I'm talking about my containers, of course, there are containers that are kind of like in a repository, but then there are also containers that are live runtime, right? So if you've got a vulnerability in a runtime container, and then that represents something that's more urgent. We actually talked about in the last podcast about reachability analysis for software composition analysis at the code level, and that runtime context is a valuable context when you're talking about container as well. Yeah,
exactly. And these advancements would always happen, right? Runtime, we used to only talk about code running, but now we're talking about runtime when the containers are running as well, and getting a reachability analysis at the runtime from within the container without actually having to look into the code. It goes back to our principles that we always talk about, the method and methodologies and tools that you would use to kind of get these risks in your pipeline would always adapt, will always kind of improve, but with a program, you essentially standardize and normalize everything.
Great. So we've talked about, in the last episode, we talked about getting the code solid. Now we're talking about getting it deployed into the cloud environment. Next, we're going to talk about testing it when it's in the cloud environment to identify vulnerabilities that are within the application itself. So let's take a break on this one, and then we'll come back in the next episode and talk about DAST, penetration testing, red teaming, and the like. Thanks very much, Rohan.
Thank you.